Everyone wants to matter, not just be liked, not just be comfortable, actually matter. Have ideas that land, have people listen, have your words change how someone thinks about the world. Most people with that desire become academics. They publish papers read by 12 people and teach undergraduates who are mostly thinking about something else. Jordan Peterson had the same desire. He was a clinical psychology professor at the University of Toronto. He had a good reputation. He gave lectures. He published. He was, by any reasonable measure, doing fine. And then he posted a YouTube video, not a polished production, not a media strategy, a video of himself in a room talking about a bill he disagreed with. What happened next turned a university professor into one of the most read, most listened to, and most argued about intellectuals on the planet, and one of the most financially independent. This is how that actually worked. Before any of this, Peterson had already been doing something unusual. Since around 2013, he had been recording his university lectures and posting them to YouTube. No marketing, no thumbnails designed to trick the algorithm. Just here are my lectures if you want them. These weren't lightweight self-help talks. They were dense, long-form explorations of psychology, mythology, philosophy, and meaning. Carl Jung, Dostoevsky, the Bible as a psychological document, the kind of content that takes real attention to absorb. And people watched, slowly, then more, then a lot. His lecture series on the psychological significance of the biblical stories and his Maps of Meaning course developed genuine followings, not because they were promoted, but because the information density was unusually high and the intellectual seriousness was real. Here's what that created before anything dramatic happened: an audience that was already self-selected for people who like to think hard about serious things. That audience would matter enormously later. In September 2016, Peterson posted a 3-part video series responding to a Canadian piece of legislation, Bill C-16, which proposed adding gender identity and gender expression to Canada's Human Rights Code. Peterson's objection was framed around compelled speech. He argued publicly that he would not use preferred pronouns he considered ideologically mandated. He made this case in detail with references to postmodern theory, Jungian psychology, and political philosophy. The university sent him letters. Students protested. Canadian media covered it. And here is the mechanism that most people miss entirely. The controversy did not damage his audience. It built it. Because there was a large population of people, particularly young men, who felt that the prevailing cultural conversation was happening without them or against them, and that saying so out loud in public had become socially dangerous. Peterson said the thing they felt in full sentences without apologizing for it, backed by academic credentials. He became almost overnight the intellectual permission structure for a huge underserved audience. This is probably the most important strategic concept in Peterson's entire story, and it gets almost no attention. Every massive audience in media history has been built by identifying people who felt ignored and giving them something made specifically for them. Fox News didn't invent conservative viewers. Those viewers already existed. They just didn't have a cable network that spoke directly to them. Mr. Beast didn't invent people who like impossible challenges and big giveaways. He just made the best version of that content that had ever existed. Peterson didn't invent the audience of young men who felt culturally displaced, intellectually hungry, and skeptical of progressive orthodoxy. That audience was already enormous. He just happened to be articulate, credentialed, willing to engage seriously with ideas, and, crucially, willing to say unfashionable things in public without hedging. Yet, when you find an underserved audience and give them what they actually want, distribution handles itself. His videos spread not because of an algorithm hack. They spread because people sent them to their friends and said, "You need to watch this." Um, um, that is the most powerful distribution mechanism on the internet. It has no budget. You cannot buy it. You can only earn it. Okay, now here's the interesting part. Peterson was not the only person saying similar things in 2016. The internet had no shortage of commentators criticizing progressive cultural trends. Most of them were anonymous or semi-anonymous or operating on the fringes. Peterson was a tenured professor of clinical psychology at a major research university with a doctorate from McGill, who had previously taught at Harvard. That credential set was not incidental. It was load-bearing. It meant that when he was attacked, the attack had to take him seriously to land. You couldn't dismiss him as uninformed. You couldn't say he hadn't done the reading. He had demonstrably done more reading than most of his critics. And crucially, for his audience, his credentials meant something they hadn't had before, a sense of intellectual legitimacy. This wasn't a guy on a forum. This was a psychologist who had worked with patients, published peer-reviewed research, and taught at Harvard, saying, "Your concerns are not ridiculous." That validation function was enormously powerful, and it was inseparable from the credentials he had spent decades accumulating. The hidden truth here: sometimes the thing that makes you powerful is the thing you built before you were trying to build anything. Well, here is where ideas became money, specifically, directly, and in a way that almost nobody had done at that scale before. In early 2017, Peterson set up a Patreon account. Patreon is a platform that allows creators to receive direct monthly payments from supporters. It had existed since 2013, but was mostly used by artists, musicians, and podcasters with niche followings. Peterson announced that if his Patreon income reached a certain threshold, he would leave his university position and pursue his work independently. The response was extraordinary. Within months, reports indicated he was earning what many sources estimated at over $50,000 per month from Patreon alone, making him, at the time, one of the highest-earning creators on the entire platform. Read that again, a clinical psychology professor. From YouTube videos about Jungian archetypes and political philosophy, $50,000 a month. From voluntary donations, the explanation isn't mysterious. He had built an audience that was deeply loyal, not casually interested, deeply loyal, and that audience had been given very little opportunity to support him directly. When the opportunity appeared, a meaningful percentage of them took it immediately. This is the economics of genuine connection at scale. When people feel that something matters to them, when they feel understood by it, when it has changed how they think, they will pay to keep it alive, not because they have to, because they want to. In January 2018, Peterson published 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. The book is worth examining carefully as a strategic object, not just an intellectual one. The title sounds like self-help, but the content is not self-help in any conventional sense. It's a dense synthesis of Jungian psychology, evolutionary biology, the Old Testament, Russian literature, and clinical case studies. This was a very deliberate calibration. The accessibility of the title brought in readers who might never have picked up a book on analytical psychology. The intellectual depth of the content kept them and created the sense of discovery that drives word of mouth. The book sold over 5 million copies. It was translated into dozens of languages. It became, for a period, the best-selling nonfiction book in the world. But money from the book was only part of the story. The book tour was equally important. Peterson's speaking events became theatrical. He sold out large venues. He was not doing author readings. Yet he was doing performances, 2 to 3 hour events with Q&A for audiences who had driven hours to attend. The book had monetized his audience directly, but it had also, by reaching millions of new readers, expanded the audience further, one feeding the other. By 2018, Peterson was everywhere. The interview with Kathy Newman on Channel 4 became one of the most watched political interview clips of the year, accumulating tens of millions of views. The dynamic, an interviewer repeatedly summarizing his positions in more extreme terms than he had used, and Peterson calmly correcting her, played directly into the narrative his audience already had about him, that he was being misrepresented by hostile media. Whether you thought the interviewer was asking fair questions or not is irrelevant to the mechanism. The clip made Peterson look calm, clear, and unfairly attacked. It spread virally. It added millions of new viewers to his existing audience. This is the paradox of media hostility for a figure like Peterson. Coverage that is meant to damage becomes recruitment advertising. Every hostile profile drives some percentage of readers to actually watch his lectures and decide for themselves. And a meaningful percentage of those people become loyal supporters. This is not unique to Peterson. It is a pattern. Figures who are publicly attacked by mainstream media and survive the attack with their coherence intact tend to accumulate audiences that are unusually resistant to being taken away. Because the audience has already been told that the mainstream media doesn't like this person, the mainstream media then attacks the person. If the person survives and continues to seem reasonable, the audience concludes, we were right not to trust them. In 2020, Peterson joined the Daily Wire Plus platform as a contributor. This was a significant move. It represented a shift from independent creator to anchored media presence with a built-in distribution infrastructure and presumably a substantial financial arrangement. Signing Peterson was an attempt to add intellectual credibility and academic depth to the brand, and to lock in a creator with one of the most loyal audiences on the internet. The specific financial terms were not disclosed, but the underlying logic is straightforward. Peterson's audience was valuable, his content created engagement at scale, and his presence on a platform was worth significant resources to whoever held it. Peterson also hosted his own podcast, the Jordan Peterson podcast, which consistently ranked among the most listened to shows in multiple countries. The podcast format suited him particularly well for one structural reason. It has no time limit. Television interviews are 5 minutes. Magazine profiles are filtered through an editor's framing. A podcast is 3 hours of uninterrupted conversation in your own space on your own terms. The format disproportionately rewards people who can sustain intellectual engagement at length, which Peterson, whatever else you think of him, demonstrably can. It would be dishonest to analyze Peterson's rise without being direct about the role of controversy. He is a polarizing figure. His views on gender, hierarchy, and political ideology have attracted sustained criticism. Yet some of the criticism is substantive, some of it is not. The structural fact is this: for the type of audience Peterson was building, every controversy functioned as a filter and a signal. The filter: people who found his views unacceptable left. People who found his views interesting or correct stayed, and their loyalty was stronger for having been tested. The signal: the fact that mainstream institutions were hostile to him was, for many of his supporters, a reason to trust him more, not less. This is not a stable dynamic forever. Controversy has a fatigue curve, but in the period from 2016 to 2020, it operated almost entirely in Peterson's favor. In 2019, Peterson suffered a serious personal health crisis related to benzodiazepine dependency, followed by a period of significant medical treatment that took him largely out of public life for over a year. His audience did not abandon him. In many cases, his openness about the experience, the physical difficulty, the treatment process, the personal cost, deepened the connection his existing audience felt. When a public figure experiences genuine suffering and chooses to discuss it honestly rather than hide it, a subset of their audience responds with something that functions like loyalty, reinforced by solidarity. He was honest about something difficult. I trust him more. His return to public activity was met with significant attention, continued sales, and an audience that had, if anything, become more cohesive. Let's be clear about what Peterson actually built. He did not become successful because he was a good psychologist, although he may be. He did not become successful because his ideas were correct on every point, which is separately debatable. He became successful because of a specific architecture that almost no one had assembled in quite this form before. He identified a large audience that felt intellectually ignored and emotionally unaddressed. He spoke to that audience in long form, with high information density, without condescension. He built credibility through institutional credentials that his critics couldn't easily dismiss. He monetized through direct channels: Patreon, books, speaking, podcast, that bypassed traditional gatekeepers. He used media hostility as a growth mechanism rather than suffering it as a liability. And he maintained coherence and output through sustained periods of controversy that would have ended most careers. Each of those elements reinforced the others. The audience size made the Patreon viable. The Patreon income funded independence from institutions. Independence from institutions made him more credible to his audience. More credibility drove book sales. Book sales brought new audience. New audience made the podcast valuable. The podcast extended reach. Extended reach brought more controversy. More controversy filtered for deeper loyalty. A flywheel, not an accident. Here is what Jordan Peterson actually did. He found an audience nobody else was serving properly. He spoke to them in full sentences with real intellectual depth, without talking down to them. He picked a public fight with an institutional position and held his ground under sustained pressure. He monetized directly, cutting out every middleman between his ideas and his audience's money. He used media hostility as recruitment advertising. He built credibility through decades of academic work. that became a strategic asset the moment controversy arrived. He kept his output volume high through periods when most people would have gone quiet. He transferred audience loyalty from one platform and format to the next without significant loss. He treated his audience as intelligent adults, capable of handling difficult material. And he did it at a moment when there was an enormous unmet demand for exactly that. The lesson isn't that controversy is a strategy. The lesson is that finding the people nobody is speaking to and then actually speaking to them clearly, seriously, and without hedging is one of the most powerful things you can do on the internet. Now, the audience was always there. He just showed up. If you like breakdowns of the strategies behind how people build real influence and turn it into something durable, subscribe. There are a lot more of them. Lot.